Hello, everybody. Hi, Thanasis. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You're blurry. Did you take your...
You're blurry on my end. So
That's,
one of us, I would say, is definitely blurry.
yeah,
Um,
I feel
yeah,
fine. What
excellent.
did you take your vitamins this morning? Or vitamins, as they say
I
on this.
did. I did take some vitamins, and please let us know in the chat if anyone else took their vitamins
Yeah.
and where you're from, and if you guys can hear us and see us okay.
And you don't need vitamins if you eat properly. That's another tip from the pros.
Oh, this is another. Oh, we're coming in as both blurry.
Both blurry.
Vitamin
So,
D, Isaac. Gotcha.
well, if it's both blurry, then it's probably your fault because you're hosting it, right?
I'm going to say, I thought you were hosting it.
I've got a 250 megabit download and 20 megabit upload. I never have
That's
problems.
exactly the same thing. I actually have a 500 download and a 220 up.
Yeah, mine is
So
better than yours.
it could be. It
Yeah,
could be. Well,
add up.
welcome everybody. And Thanasis, can you see my screen on your end just to go over a little bit of housekeeping?
Let's see, whereas now viewing Nicara's screen, and it's actually perfectly clear on my end. It's very, very...
Excellent. This is what I'm looking for, and I just wanted to give everyone some resources before we begin our session here on titles and looking at rendering it out of some Cinema 4D, and we're going to do some compositing inside of After Effects. That's the agenda for the day. So welcome, Thanasis. It's great to see you and that you're back here again. If you guys don't know who Thanasis is, you should definitely check out his YouTube page. Where can they find you? Is that at Noseman? Am I correct?
If you Google Noseman, I come up first.
Do
So
you s-
that as
how
simple as that. My Twitter account is NosemanGR, one word, because I'm Noseman and I'm Greek. And if you go by name, Athanasios Pouzantzis, the name you see under my beautiful photo, I think it's somewhere here. And you just search on Google, or if you go to noseman.org, which comes up first in Google, you click on the YouTube and you can see me there. I do have an Instagram account, which I've made a point to I've only had one post over the years telling people that I'm moving my account. But nonetheless, just follow me. It's a matter of vanity, you know. I'll take anyone that wants to see me, even if I'm not doing anything. Yeah, I'll take it.
Yes, and you've started to do some like webinars on your channel as well. So I know that you're going to be announcing in the next week potentially one
Yep.
coming up shortly. So you
We've
should
had a bit of
definitely
a
stay
pile up of
tuned.
work. Yeah, we had a bit of pile up of work, and I neglected it the last few weeks. But the plan was to do it every couple of weeks, and very soon, my friend Nick Haraz, just in case you didn't know, this guy next to me, he's going to be a guest on the show, and yeah, it'll be full of banter and very limited in knowledge, but nonetheless, it's going to be fun.
It will still. Oh, wait, look, Chad, you're back. How's it going, man?
Yeah, I'm good. I can't get my camera to work. I'm really sorry, but I'm
I
here.
know I'm experiencing a few problems here in GoToWebinar, so hopefully they go away. But as long as everyone can see my screen okay, we've gone over Thanasis's webpage. And I want to also just mention all of the other fabulous events coming on here at Maxon. This is week 4 of 5 of the title series, so come check us out. You guys are checking us out this week, but don't forget to check us out final week next Monday, where we're going to be looking at some further compositing with titles, specifically looking at VFX Suite and a few other tricks of the trade in After Effects. And another series going on right now is a hands-on Maxon series. You can follow along with some exercise files in the Introduction to Color Grading, which is now on part 4, and I believe happening every Thursday. So check that out. We're going to be recording this webinar, and keep in mind that you can check this out on the Maxon Training Team YouTube page here. So if you go to YouTube and type in Maxon Training Team, usually within about a few days, you'll be able to find out or see and watch this webinar again. So totally check that out. Last thing, we still have free shirts. So I'm going to, in a few moments, put this page in the thread. So just bear with me a second, but keep in mind that the actual code for this is 08 titles, all in cap. You'll get yourself a free t-shirt as long as you pay for shipping and handling. So that's it in terms of just the web pages that I wanted to go through. And what do we have in store for today, Chad?
Today we're going to start with Thanasis, and we're going to get into some basic compositing and rendering stuff, and that's going to be thrilling.
Yeah, and there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, and we're going to be sharing this workflow amongst the three of us, which I find really exciting as well. So Thanasis is going to start off in Cinema 4D. He's going to send us some files that Chad will then take over and manipulate inside of After Effects, and I'm going to do some final touching myself. I just wanted to kind of show where we're going to be ending up. Can you guys see my After Effects page yet? I might just have to refresh my screen if you don't.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, awesome. So this is a proxy or final result, but there's several elements involved here. The 3D text is from Cinema 4D, as well as the fractured object that Thanasis put together. Chad did some color correction using Magic Bullet Looks and is going to taking some of these passes that we get over from Cinema and giving it a bit of color grading. And then I added some stylistic effects using Red Giant Universe. This included a couple effects for light leaks within Universe, but also I utilized No Light Factory for one of the light leaks, which I'll discuss. Not to mention added some additional particles using Trapcode Particular, just so we could have some additional rocks falling there over the titles. And then lastly, compositing the 2D title of Noseman that you see at the top. But I'll make sure to show this a few times throughout here, but this is what we're building up towards. And now I'm just going to Thanasis, can you take over the presenter, if you don't mind, just from the presenter screen, because I'm unable to hand it over to you right now.
Okay, make presenter. I'm making myself presenter, and I'm going to show my main screen. And we see Nick and Chad. So thank you very much for watching. This is what we're going to show. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how we can set up a scene in an extremely simple manner. And it's going to render in black and white, because then all the color and the beautification is going to happen in compositing. And it's sort of an illustration how you don't need to overcomplicate things when you're doing, when you have a solid idea, and we stole this idea. I'm not going to tell you where from, not the names though. So if there's a good idea, it's not always difficult to implement and make something that is interesting. So we're going to start from scratch, from a new scene, and let me open a new scene and begin. I'm somewhere over here. I'm just going to drag in an Illustrator 8 file, which I created this, Nick and Chad. And I'm going to take the whole thing and I'm going to center it using my reset transform, press H. And here we have the logo. I'm going to add an extrude generator, drag the whole thing underneath. And in order for an extrude to work on a hierarchy of objects, you have to select the extrude generator, go to the object and click on the hierarchical. This is sort of a residue from the good old days, but it still works nicely. And I'm going to make the whole spline 10 times larger. So select the null, go and say scale, and just say 10 tab 10 tab 10. So it's 10 times larger. Press H to frame it. And the other thing I'm going to do now is rotate this. Now, first of all, you can see the floor is irritating me. And if you go to the display options configure all, you can go and say, let's get rid of the save frames. No, we want the save frames, but I want to get rid of the filters. It's the same filters we have here. I'm going to get rid of my work plane and maybe my horizon just to clean up the view. And I'm going to take the whole extrude and rotate it a few degrees that way. And as far as I remember, it was around 50 degrees, minus 50 degrees. Excellent. So there you go. Let me undo, and here's the angle we're going to view it from. Now let's go and add a camera, because I need a way to control what I'm seeing from what angle. Activate the camera with your 3D selected, and let's go and 0 the X and 0 the Y. And I don't know, as far as I remember, this was something on minus 250 or something. I don't know. and zero out the rotations. So it's pretty centered. Again, if I want to, with my camera selected, I can go to my composition settings and set up some grids or something like that to center this up. I'm not going to fuss about this too much, maybe pull it out a bit. Good. Now I want to create a slight animation to this. I prefer working with my lines activated, a slight animation, and it's just the text going upwards. So what I'm going to do, just to make sure that I have full control and as few as possible keyframes, I'm going to select the extrude and I'm going to press Alt G, which is the equivalent of going and adding a group. The group is going to add a null in the exact same position and rotation as the object I had selected, the extrude. I'm going to call this logo. And then I'm going to use the extrude to move this in the Y or to move this in the Z. So I have a one only value to change. So I'm going to go from frame 0. I'm going to set, first of all, the length of my animation of my timeline to 120 frames. And I'm going to say at frame 0, Z0 at frame 120, this should be, I would say, 20 or something like that. So minus 20, that's going the other way around. So here's my animation. Did I click the keyframe? I didn't. Minus 20 and add the keyframe. There you go. Something like that. Now, if I wish to adjust the camera, I can go and just adjust it to bring it exactly where I want it to be, and my animation plays. Good. Now let's go and add some more elements to this. So first of all, select the extrude, go to the caps. I want to add a bit of beveling here, very simple beveling. I'm going to set this to 0.5. I think it's good enough. And my segment to 1. I just want one flat edge here. So this is how this thing renders in the viewport. And already the shape is where I want it to be. And now I want to add a few things that have to do with lighting and so forth. So let's go and add a sky object. Let's go to our asset browser and type here HDR. And we have quite a few assets here. And let's go and select some sort of material. Let's see if I have something on my notes. No. So let's go and select something that has trees. Here are the images and here are the materials. Let me look closely. I'm going to go and grab this one. So double click on this and the material is going to be added here. And let me go and just drag it and put it on my sky object. And I don't want this visible in my render. I just want it to affect my reflections and so forth. So we right click and we add a render tag. The compositing allows us to exclude certain aspects of the render, so I don't want it to be seen by the camera. But now I need to create some sort of material so that the sky reflects on that. So let's go and create a PBR material. Or if you don't want to, just a standard Cinema 4D material, put it on the logo, on the parent or anything like that. Let me name this logo main. And I need to make sure that it has some sort of reflective attribute to it. I'm going to leave the default specular here for now. I'm going to go and add Beckman if you want it plastic, GGX if you want it a bit more metallic. And now if you render, you will see that it catches the reflections and already it looks quite interesting. The other thing is I want to catch some ambient occlusion in the little corners just to darken them down. They're not going to be very visible in the final one. So go and add a diffusion layer. Diffusion layer darkens things, the luminance lightens things. So this is multiplied over it and this is added over it. Turn on all your channels and add an ambient occlusion. And now if I render this, it's going to take a few more seconds to render, but we're catching that little ambient occlusion in here, a bit of detail. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the color because there's blue coming through and some other little colors. I want this to be grayscale. So go to your sky material and turn off the reflectance. Doesn't do anything. Go to the luminance and on top of this add a filter. And the filter allows us to do color correction on shaders. So I'm going to turn the saturation down. This is now black and white. So if I render this, you will see that we only get the lightness parameter of it. And this looks pretty good. So again, I'm looking at my notes here. And what I want to do in this particular case is just make it ever so slightly less reflective. So I'm going to just go and bring down the reflection strength to just tune it in and make it have a bit more grayscale. Don't want it to burn out. And I think I'm happy with that. It still animates, no problem whatsoever. Now, I want to go to the top and add some scratches. So because I don't want these scratches to be on the side, I'm going to create another material. So drag this over here, and before you release it, press Command or Control. You see the plus, and I'm going to apply it on my logo. And I'm going to make this stick to the C1, the cap number 1. I can bring these down just to make it easier. If you go to the extrude, you can go to selections and expose these. You have a sort of a guide of what each and every one of these are. So let's go to this material. It's the one that's highlighted, and let's go to the bump or the normal channel. I like to use the normal channel, although I'm going to use a bump, and I add what's called a normalizer, which should be in the effects normalizer. And this takes any black and white height map and turns it into a normal. It just gives you a bit more control. So click here. Oh, go back. I want to add, oh yeah, in the normalizer, I need to add a texture in here. So let's open this asset manager and type scratches. And let me put on text, and I want to find a one called scratches 05 tiled, somewhere around here, 05 tileable. There you go, and just drag it in here, and these are going to become our scratches for the top. So let's close this and see what we have here. I'm going to render. We can't really see anything yet, just a bit over here. So take this, the top, set it to flat projection, select your object and your material, go to your UV texture mode. And what we can do here is sort of make it smaller if I want to tile more of these scratches. You can see now they're coming, they're appearing a bit better. So again, let me find which one of these it is. I always get confused. And I'm going to go to the normal and make sure that these scratches are quite powerful. There you go. Look at them. So that's why I use the normalizer. It allows me to do these sort of effects, just make whatever my texture is a bit more prominent. Maybe I'll scale it down a bit more, and it's tileable, so it's going to appear everywhere. And I'm happy with my scratches. Now let's do one more thing. I want to catch some really intense highlights around only these bevels, nothing else. And for that, I'm going to use a little trick. I'm going to make another material. I'm going to call this bevels, and I'm going to drag them on my extrude. And remember, I need to go and get, you can see one of these, the start bevel is R1. I'm going to take this and type R1. So let's assume that this was, let's say, red. You will see that this material is applied only on that bevel. Now, I don't want it red. What I wanted to do is catch light, only light, nothing else. And to do that, you just get a default specular or any of the other specular models, and you tell it the specular strength to be full. And I don't want to catch anything else, only speculars. Now, what does the specular strength mean? It means that it catches the reflections from light sources, literal light sources like this one. I'm going to create a light. I'm going to go to my model mode and my move tool, and I'm going to bring this over here. I can go to my my orthographic views if I want to move it around. And what I'm going to do in order to see what's going on is press Alt-R to bring up the interactive render region. And hopefully when I start changing parameters, we'll be able to see what's going on. To widen a specular, you need to increase its width. And look at that now. We're getting all these bright highlights only where the rounding is. And depending on how many of these I want them all to be nicely lit, so I can take the light and move it to the other side. And made a copy, pressing Command or Control. I want to bring it up a bit, and now we should see these highlights everywhere. So I've made this extra highlight, and because I'm using speculars, I can actually separate this from the reflections, providing that the material that's giving us the overall reflection doesn't have much reflection, specular strength. So if I remove the speculars from the two main materials, then the surface of my object only receives reflection, and these little roundings only receive the light, and these will be rendered out separately in my passes. There are other ways to do this, but I'm not going to bother. Now, all the light.
Thanasis,
Yes.
there was just a question here in the chat about if you could just point out what tool you use to rescale the scratch texture. It was just missed.
Yes. So you need to use this one here. This button here is called the texture mode. So this moves objects. This moves points, edges, polygons. This moves the axes. This moves a texture. If you select it and you go to the object you're modifying and a material that has one of the usual projections, the geometric projections, flat, spherical, cylindrical, cubic, and so forth, you can now use your axes, move, scale, and rotate to move that. So we're moving the actual tile. What you see here is the UV tile. And that's how you can go and do that. If I were to put a decal here, I would take this and say, I don't want it to tile. I just want my material to be applied within the boundaries of this. So now you can see the scratches only within this square. So it allows us to modify the placement of a material using a projection, a geometric projection, and use proper transform tools, scale, rotate, and move to place it. Don't forget to go back to this. So that's how you use that. Now, where was I? So I've done the reflection and all that. Good. So what we see here is our model, and it renders fine. It takes about 1 to 2 seconds to render per frame. I'm not very happy. I wish it was 1/10 of a second, but there you have it. Now, to render this using passes, I'm not going to render the whole thing. I've rendered this out in this configuration, but I'm going to show you how to do it. Turn on your render, bring up your render settings, and in the multipass, activate it. And if you go to the multi-passes, all these can be rendered separately. So what I want to do is get the specular and the reflection passes. If you don't know, and in order to learn your passes, add them or render a scene and go and check them out in your picture viewer. So for now, I'm going to add the specular, and I'm going to go here and add the reflection. And in order to save these, first of all, we've, as far as I remember, we did a 16-bit ping, and I'm going to add whatever I'm going to add here. And you can even set a different path for your multipasses. So again, I'm going to go ping 16-bit. I'm not going to put any names, and I'm just going to render in my picture viewer. To view this properly, all you have to do is, with whatever you have rendered selected, you go to the layer and you say single pass, and you can see the reflection. So it doesn't have the speculars, and here is just the specular. So just with this simple thing, we have very good control over which passes we are going to use. Now, in any case, the last thing I'm going to say before I go on to the fracture, if I wanted to add some sort of highlight over here in this little spot, but I didn't want it to be a specular, so I can have it separately, although again, there are other ways to do that. Because it's a reflection, you can do something like you can add a luminant object. Let's take a sphere and move it back. Let's go and go here and make it smaller and move it right up here and even smaller, and put this luminant thing on this. Because that's luminant now, it is going to create some sort of reflection on your object. I'm going to bring it closer, much closer, so you can see its effect. And let me go and increase my luminance to 500%. And there you go. So there are ways to trick your rendering to believe that there's a light, but it's not a light, it's an object with a luminant channel. And because it's a reflection, it doesn't appear in the specular pass. And of course, you can tell this in the render compositing. I don't want the camera to see it. I just want the reflections to see it. So you can do so many tricks with Cinema 4D's built-in renderers, and create all sorts of nice little effects and be able to save your separate passes. So this is component number 1. This is going to be part of the background. I'm going to render it, don't forget, with a alpha channel, and because we use straight alpha. When you're rendering from 3D, it's better to put straight alpha because it doesn't create any fringing whatsoever. And you will see a weird artifact happening. The last thing I'm going to say, you're going to see something popping up around. Look at these little dots here. These dots are just an outline that's created over your render so that when it's masked out, you don't get any fringing. So you see these, they look funny, they look broken, but actually those are the reasons we don't get fringing. So when you see these, you should rest assured that your rendering is coming out properly. When we view this with transparency, that's what's going to keep things from breaking apart. And of course, we have our alpha pass here. There it is. And the last thing I'm going to show is that you can see that these little things lie outside the alpha. Look at that. So they won't appear in your compositing. So let's go to the next stage and create that fracturing thingamadoodle, which the final version of it is this, which is an Alembic file. So how would we do that? So this is our original file, and you're going to get a set of all these files. Anyway, so I'm going to go and create a very simple cube and make this cube quite small, quite narrow. And I'm going to bring it the front so it sits approximately where I want it to sit in front of my camera. And I can go and remove the logo now. I don't need it. I don't even need skies, maybe the lights. I don't care about all these things. I'm just going to leave the camera, which is the important part. And let's delete unused materials. Now, I'm going to fracture this, but before I fracture it, I want to have a bit more detail to it. So let's go and add some segmentation here. So let's increase the segments. This looks good, and this looks good, and I don't know, let's put 20 here. And then I'm going to fracture it. So let's go Voronoi Fracture, and let's fracture it. And I want to add, I don't want to have straight edges at all. So go and add a displacer, make it a child of the cube. If you want to see what goes on without the fracture, we're going to see it by turning off that displacer. Let's go to shading and add some noise. And look at that. We get this noisy thing now, which I'm pretty happy with. So if I fracture this, now I get a noisy and very interesting shape. Go to the Voronoi Fracture, go to the point generator. In the sources tab, select the point generator and increase this to 100 fracture points. And excellent. Now let's go and add some dynamics to this. Right click, go to the simulation tags, add a rigid body, press play and everything falls. I don't want everything to fall like that. I want things to explode. And in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of a parameter of the collision, which is the size increment. And if I make this, if it's 0, that means that each surface is adjacent to the other one. But if I make this 0.2, then these are overlapping now. The collision geometry is overlapping. So it's going to create some sort of small explosion. Now we have too much gravity. So I'm going to go to my project settings here, project settings, and I'm going to go to dynamics and go no gravity. I'm going to add some other gravity, 0. So this should go boom. There you go. I like how this explodes in slow motion, but I want to add a directionality to it. I want these buggers over here, I want them to move towards the camera that way, as if there's an explosion here, and that's what it does. So one thing people may not know is that the forces we use for standard particles, the gravity, it actually works with dynamics as well. So now everything's going to go down. You can see everything goes down. I can rotate this to go towards the camera. So now they're going to go that way. Let's see how this looks if I view it from a camera point of view. There you go. That looks really nice. Let's go and make the gravity less. I think 50 will suffice for what we're doing. There we go. So they are going down. Perfect. And maybe even 60. And that's all I'm going to do with the gravity. And they go towards me and then down. Excellent. I love this. So let me go and turn off the colorization of the fragments. And with this selected, I'm going to right click and say bake as Alembic. And I'll explain why I'm going to bake as Alembic. You can see that it goes really, really fast. And the good thing about the Alembic file is that now all the motion is baked into that file and I can scrub back and forth. And you can see that it's going a bit too fast. I want this to go slower. So all you have to do is go to the Voronoi Fracture, the parent object. Every one of these fractures are now Alembic objects. And I can actually turn the speed down. I could dial in how fast I want this to happen. I can go and say, I want this to be 10%. And it goes, oh, actually, I need to go to all the objects. So middle click on this to select all the objects. And let's make this 20%. There you go. So if you middle click on a parent, it selects all the children. So 50%. And there you go. So now you can see we can control the speed of this rendering. Finally, this is how this looks. And let's go and add some lighting. I'm going to get one light. I can scrub here so I can see what's going on. A backlight. And I'm going to go and increase intensity a bit. Good. I can go and add some shadows if I wish to do that. Go to your light general settings, shadow. I can add some soft shadows just so we have some occlusion. Then I can take this and move it to the other side and maybe bring it down a bit and bring down the intensity just to get some bounce light. And maybe I want to get another light and move it here where the camera is and bring the intensity even further down. I don't want it to be totally black. And there you go. Because this is going to be colorized in compositing, I can actually, it's better if I have some color. And again, depending on what you're trying to do, you can go and change the fracturing model and so forth from before. And the last thing I'm going to do, just make it a bit faster. So 70%. And this is going to be a separate render, which means I can bring it into my composition at any time I want. And these are all the elements. I'm not going to do any passes for this. This I'm going to render it purely black and white. And the result we get is the following. Let's go to Picture Viewer and let me show you all the renders we've done. And this is the Nick and Chad rendered. And this is the Specular rendered. And it's caught some of the scratch. And this is the reflection rendered, so we can split them. And this is the fracture rendered. It's slightly different than the one I did. And there you go. So these, the beauty, which has everything, the specular, the reflection, and the render of the fracture are saved as PNGs with their alpha channels. And that's all I have for today. Ask me your questions or whatnot. And Nick, I'm handing you
before you do, there actually are a few questions just here in the chat, and it's going to be handed over to Chad next. But one of the questions comes from Randy, and this is just more generally about Cineversity. There was some conversation in the thread about ArtSmart when you were showing the Illustrator 8 example. He was just curious if there's been a more in-depth tutorial on ArtSmart minus the one that is on Cineversity, the short demo, if you know of any.
Yeah, not yet. We are planning a remake of many of the tutorials, and because since S24 we had a slight change in the interface, we're trying to identify which tutorials are being affected more. And yeah, overall we're trying to improve as much as we can, but don't forget there are more than 4,500 tutorials on Cineversity, and we have to prioritize our ways. But yeah, the ArtSmart is the plugin is extremely powerful, but because of the differences between how Adobe Illustrator's technology works and how the PDF file is saved and how Cinema 4D works and how these things need to be translated, there are always these little knickknacks that make things slightly more difficult. But generally, we're trying to update as many tutorials as we can. That's the only thing I can say at this point.
Okay, and then Tyler had a great question here, which was he wanted basically an explanation to the advantages of baking as object as an Alembic. What the advantages are of baking.
Yeah, the advantages is that you suddenly have a deterministic animation which you can change the speed and all that. This would be the same. It's exactly the same thing as previewing your After Effects project. And imagine if After Effects has to calculate every time you move your timeline, it has to calculate the image and calculate the image and calculate the image. Certain effects cannot be calculated if you're going backwards, some echo effects and all that. But once it's baked, once it's rendered, in a sequential series of frames, then you can scrub properly and everything's in place. So the analogy is any advantages you get when you you render your timeline in After Effects compared to calculating it for every frame, the equivalent advantages for occur in 3D. So if you have some heavy simulation, for example, and you click here, and with simulations, that's something that happens very often. So if I go back here until before this was baked as an Alembic, there you go. So here, for example, there's a simulation, right? That means that if I scrub, I'm not getting the correct result. This is not what you're going to see at frame 80, because it needs to know what happened before in order to do what happened after. And since my timeline, my playhead was on frame, let's say 83, I didn't start from the beginning. Cinema 4D has no idea what happened from here to here, because this is a simulated effect. And I have to go back and say, let me see how it looks at frame 80. And you wait, stop it here, and let's advance. Oh, there's nothing at frame 80. Whereas if you bake it, this information gets fixed, it gets locked into that. Now, you can't go and change things. You can't change your gravity, but you can save intermediate Alembic files when you want to scrub your animation and see what's going on. So it's a utility. You should do it when you're doing your final render, especially if you're sending something to a render farm. Then you avoid any kind of incompatibilities or stuff like that. So baking is a good way to go, depending on the workflow. And if you watch some of my presentations I did for that jellyfish setup and all that for Maxon 3D Motion Show, I'm showing ways to use it incrementally within your workflow. So before you light, like I did with this dynamic setup. Once I was happy with my dynamic setup, then baking it to do the lighting is actually better, because you can instantly go to any frame and see how the lighting looks without having to scrub all the time.
Awesome. Thanks, Thanasis. And I just had one more question for you. In the composite later, I'm going to be showing some stuff with Particular, like adding additional rubble and so forth. But since we didn't do it on this example, but one thing that Particular can take advantage of is the Z-buffer inside of Cinema 4D, if you give it a Z-buffer pass. And I was curious if you could just talk to that towards the fracture object for a second. In this example, we don't essentially, because we're taking frames a little bit later from your dynamic simulation, we don't necessarily need that Z-buffer pass. But in the case that I want to, let's say, rubble from Particular, which I can create, to feel like it came from inside the object, what would I want to add in terms of a pass to get that over to After Effects?
The depth pass, you mean? The pure depth pass?
The Z pass, yeah, the depth pass.
Yeah, so there are a few ways to do this. The one I would say is best is you go to your camera, and your camera has in the details a depth of field front and depth of field back. Now that's because usually with a camera from the focal plane you get blurring on the back and on the front. Here you can actually arrange where these passes are going to occur, where these, why isn't it? Oh yeah, because I need to bring my focal plane. So yeah, you need to bring your focal plane. So go to the camera, go to the object, bring your focal plane when you want it to be exactly where you want your focus point. And then in the details, you can activate, so start 0, no, end is 0 here. And you can create this, there you go, the maximum blurring. So if I scrub here, you'll see that, let's say my maximum blurring, I want anything that passes this plane. So what I'm going to do now is render a pass where everything that's on the focal plane is going to be bright or black. I think it's black, and everything that's going to be closer to the blurry, the front map, is going to be white. Let's go and test that. So on this frame, let's go here and add a pass, and that pass is the depth. There you go, the depth pass. I'm going to turn off these two, and let's go and render this frame and go to the layer and go to depth and single pass. There you go. So you can see it clearly here. Anything that's closer to the camera is white. Anything that's further from the camera is black. Because if you take this and use it as to mask a, let's say, a camera lens blur in After Effects. It will blur things more that are closer to the camera and less that are back of the camera. And you can create two of these passes in two separate renders, or create one that has back and front in the same pass. It's up to you to do this. So this is the there you go.
Awesome.
So 0 is the focal plane. So now anything that's in front of this is going to become whiter. Anything on this plane is going to be black, and anything behind this is going to become whiter as well. So I might as well do this and give it one more render, and you'll see that both the ones on the back and ones on the front are going to produce. There you go. So the background is white because everything in infinity is actually fully blurred. All right, so that's why I prefer to do this in two passes, and mostly use the front. If you want this to take into account everything, you can do this. So now I've included the whole range of objects, and if I render this, I'm going to get gradients, which allows me to control my midpoint inside my compositor, and say that anything that's 50% is not blurred, anything that's white or anything that's black is blurred, and so forth. So compositing blurring gives you this ability. But this is the simple way. The fake sort of depth, Z depth, to use in your compositor.
Thanks, Thanasis.
You're welcome.
All right, I think, Chad, you're up next. You got some stuff to show in After Effects.
I was supposed to be
Okay.
minutes. Now it's 40. Oh my God, Chad has a lot of work. So are you going to grab this from me, or do I need to render it to someone?
I think, no, we have your files.
I know.
We've
rendered
planned in the background.
Yeah, Chad, you can pick up the screen. I stopped
Okay,
showing.
I'll try to, okay, here we go. Are you seeing my After Effects?
Yes, we are.
Okay, cool. Sorry, my webcam is not working today, so it's been a rough morning though. You're not missing out on anything, but okay. So I have Thanasis's renders here, the same stuff that he was just playing with, and I just kind of want to quickly go over a few little bells and whistles. That was amazing, by the way, Thanasis. That was an incredible blast of great information. I feel like you were running at like 24 TPS, like tips per second. That's fantastic. So I just want to show like really quick, you know, we can take, actually, I'm just going to skip ahead here. So like we can come in here and just bring in the Cinema 4D file. And this is kind of the workflow that's often kind of being pushed a lot lately, is that we work with Cineware. So if we just bring in this exact file, the Cinema 4D native file that Thanasis was working on, I can bring it into After Effects, and the Cineware plugin will be loaded automatically, and I could bring this in and I can, you know, do a looks adjustment and kind of play around with it. And this is, you know, the results are not stellar. The performance is honestly not stellar either, but it is kind of a cool way if you're working in a pipeline, if you're working in a chain where there's multiple people working, you can start to develop looks and compositing things while it's still in production. So I think that's like a really great benefit, especially if you're doing titles. You're probably going to be on a small crew, and being able to kind of like start working on the look stuff while the tiles are still being rendered or still being worked on is a really great benefit. So I just want to say that. Now, if you're new to this whole idea of multipass, I'm just going to show you some of the things that you can do with it. Like if you're coming from a visual effects background, then, you know, we use render passes all the time. It's totally normal. If you're gonna have a composite a robot into a scene, you need to be able to control, you know, the lighting, the reflections, the specular highlights, all those things to blend it into the scene. But if you're coming from a motion design background, you might not have used passes before. It's not as common, but I think in title design, it can be really helpful. So again, we have the two layers here. We have what we call a beauty pass, And the beauty pass is just kind of like the nickname we give to the RGBA pass, which is basically the color channels RGB and the alpha channel, the A. And oftentimes the alpha will be rendered separately. It doesn't have to be, but in this case, we have RGBA on one channel or one render. And so then we call this the beauty pass. And then I also have the fracture on a separate layer as well. But I also have, as Thanasis mentioned, I have a pass that's just the reflection. I have another pass that is just the specular highlights. And when you're doing title design, this gives us a lot of flexibility because those little bevels right here on these edges are isolated onto this one pass. So let me just show you a few things because I want to get this over to Nick really quick, but I'm just going to show you very briefly a few things that I did using this specular pass. So one of the things that I did, again, we have the specular pass. And because it's isolated, which is these like white highlights, I used a new universe effect called Electrify, which is pretty cool. It looks at the image contours and can add a little bit of electricity. So without literally like any work at all, I just like applied this Electrify effect, and then we have electricity going along the edges of our text, and it feels like this cool, you know, effect that I spent some time on. When actually I just kind of like fiddled with like just like a couple settings, but this is just kind of Electrify doing its electrify-y thing around the edges because they're isolated because of the specular highlights. Another example, similarly, I used Vegas, the old Vegas effect from After Effects to go along these lines as well, using the image contours option also in Vegas. And so we can have these kind of like cool tracing lines. And also, you know, because we have these things isolated, I'll turn off Vegas here, optical glow. We could also use this as a luminance matte. So if we wanted to put like a texture or some other type of thing inside of the text, we could use this as a luma matte. One final example here, I just went and I added a tint effect, and let me just go ahead and turn off the mask here. So I added just a simple tint effect. So, and I made this a super white color so you can't see it. But then I used optical glow here to bring this out, and it just makes it glow there. And then I added a mask so that the highlight only shows up where the mask is. And this was like a 2-second effect just to kind of create these glowing edges. And again, these are very simple, very quick things to do with a title. But oftentimes when you have a title, this is the kind of stuff that you're looking to do. And if you don't have those passes rendered out, trying to like isolate the edges and get things just along the edge, that can be a pain.
Chad, did
yes,
you change the blend mode of the specular pass? I was just curious.
I did, thank you. Yes.
No
So this is like normal, and that's not without its charms. But then I also, put this into the add blend mode so that it would go over the top there. Yeah, so there's a million different things that you could do. I mean, that's also kind of a cool effect, just having this like haunting meow outline of stuff. Forget the sound effects. Yeah. So there's a lot you can do when you have these passes separated out to give you a lot of control. I want to hand this back over to you, Nick, but I just want to show you very quickly that one of the things that you can do is add like a looks adjustment layer, which is what I did. And actually, I'll just jump right to the finals for time's sake. But what I did was just added an instance of Magic Bullet looks, and I'll show you what I did really quick. Because what we're kind of doing here is pretending that, you know, we're in this pipeline where, you know, Thanasis is doing the 3D stuff. I'm doing kind of this intermediate stuff, or I'm doing some kind of like look development, and then I'm handing it over to Nick for some polish. So as I was in Magic Bullet looks here, let's see, hold on a second, I lost my, there we go. So as I'm in Magic Bullet looks here, I'm just gonna go through what I did. I added this edge softness. Actually, I'll just go ahead and take off all of these things. By the way, there's a little keyboard shortcut. You could use the / key to turn everything on and off. But but I wanted to go through like one by one here. So I added Colorista, and let's see here. It's oh, there we go. Okay, so I added Colorista, went down to the curves, and I pulled blue out of this to add yellow, and then I pulled a little bit of green out of this to add some magenta, and that kind of gave me this burnt-ish color here. And then I added this edge softness, which is a very quick and dirty way to simulate depth of field. I mean, it's not looking at the depth pass or anything like that. It's just blurring the whole thing. But again, for look development, this can be fine for very quick and dirty look development. I also added a lens vignette, added some diffusion to get some light in there, as well as a haze flare to add some little streaks of light. And then of course, chromatic aberration to give us this kind of like these kind of channels showing up on the edges. And then we determined that I'm just like out of time and I have to hand it over to Nick for the final polish. So
I actually just wanted to mention something about this workflow, which I find fascinating, Chad. Thanasis, let's just say for any reason that you were still developing a bit of the 3D extruded look of the text, and then working with the fracture object for any reason of the production pipeline, Chad could right now actually save this magic bullet look, and as long as Thanasis has it on the right place on his computer, he could view this look inside of Cinema 4D. Not that you would necessarily want to use it for rendering out, but Thanasis could start a look on one end, share that look with Chad on his system in After Effects, looking that right inside of Cinema 4D, or vice versa if you ever had to go back. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things about looks, is that that is the one application that's shared between Cinema 4D and After Effects right now.
And I think it was developed largely to be able to increase the collaboration, because we have this this idea of these two extreme parts of the pipeline, which very rarely communicate. They're on different sort of levels, but in fact, these sort of integrations allow for better collaboration, because you can get a better idea on how what you're doing is going to look on the other side of the pipeline. So I think I don't use it because I focus on the structural components, but as a tool for a team or a pipeline, it's actually extremely handy.
Cool.
Yeah.
We
Awesome.
need to implement a walkie-talkie style things. When I'm done talking, I should say over, so you can take over. Over.
Over. Got it.
Over. Yeah.
And I'm stealing your screen right now, Chad.
Do it. I'm gonna give it to you anyways. There you go.
And just for the sake of my web connection, for whatever reason, I am, let me show my main screen. Can anyone see my main screen? Because I can't see it on the...
No, we see the correction thing.
Let me try this again. I got to find my name from the list.
I'm going to make you a presenter.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
you owe me one more now, Nick. One more.
We'll talk about it after. We don't want to...
You can discuss
count all the IOUs right now, Thanasis, in front of the group.
Yeah, it says I'm waiting to view Nick's screen.
Yeah, I can't, for some reason, I don't have, oh, there we go. I had to press play a third time. Everyone sees it now?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a proxy version of the final. I want to draw your attention to a few things going on. One is a series of light leaks that are over top the entire imagery, as well as some grain. So this was done on a final adjustment layer, which I'll discuss. But just before that, I did want to break down a series of secondary, what we can call particles, that are being developed behind this rubble. And I just used Trapcode to quickly create some rubble and referenced some sprites within Trapcode particular for this secondary debris. And I have a composition here where I'll break down a little bit of that, but here's Thanasis's fracture render, the image sequence here that we have in the foreground. And in the background, I just have a fresh version of Trapcode, Particular, a point-based system. And I did all of my work originally in the designer to try to mimic some of the movement of the fracture as much as Particular could do so. So let me hop inside the designer, because I highly recommend this as your place to work with particle systems. You're going to gain a lot more speed, not to mention under this little gear icon on the bottom right-hand corner, we can switch between different acceleration modes depending on your system and what you're working with. So you can take advantage of your GPU or graphic card and then choose between two types of particle rendering. And since I'm using sprite references, this is a good idea just to make sure that I do have some GPU acceleration here inside a Particular. Now, if you are just starting out in Particular, keep in mind you have all of these presets that you can choose from to start off with, including some specifically related towards dust and debris. And the minute that you single click any of these, that's going to replace out the default particle system. But I'll just show this from scratch. So I'll reset this. And the first thing that I want to do over here on the side is adjust this emitter type. So I'm going to set this for this example to be a block. And then I'm going to have the block's actual size be a lot larger. So we're going to set this to 2000 in terms of its size. And we're going to change the way that these particles are being born. Right now, every second, a series of 100 particles are being born. I want to set that to be an explosion. So we have this random explosion of a few particles in this box-based emitter. And during that explode behavior, it's a good time right now to crank up the particles per second. This doesn't relate right now to the amount of particles in the scene, but we can see there that we have some particles and they're being emitted.
Nick, sorry, would you mind moving your Trapcode designer window to the left a bit? It's cutting out there so we can see the value.
Yeah, so I did here under the emitter type block, I set the emitter type to a box, the emitter behavior to explode, and 2000 particles per second. So right now we have an explosion of particles and they live for 3 seconds and then they pop off screen and die. So if we needed to sort of match the length or timing of Thanasis's fracture of how long they live for before they fall off screen, I can go to the particle type and just crank up the life. I'll just set this to 9 seconds, although that's too long, or 5 seconds if I wanted it to be around the length of the actual composition. Now, in terms of the movement of the particles, I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to head back to the motion block and actually rotate this particle system. So what's happened now is that there's an initial velocity value that, did I rotate that the right way? That is kind of having these particles shoot all over the place. But if I change the direction mode to what's called directional with that X rotation, now these particles, based on their velocity amount or default velocity amount of 100, sort of float upward. Now in Cinema 4D, gravity is automatically turned when you are doing a dynamic simulation, but in Trapcode Particular, because we can also work with environment and physics, I have to go to the environment block and actually turn on gravity. And once I do, I have one force, which happens to be the initial 100 velocity, but then after that velocity, gravity takes over and these particles now fall down. In terms of the look of the particles, you can have anything be essentially referenced as a particle type. But Particular ships with a series of sprites, your own images, that you can reference at any time. So I had one system. I'm going to go here to choose a sprite and scroll down in this huge library of sprites available to where I'll find some eventually after this dust and debris. It's going to take a second just to show the image preview here. But once it does, in fact, if it doesn't come up, I'll just actually load this. Here we go. There's these different types of rocks. The first rocks, 1, 2, and 3 actually happen to be MOV files. So they have some animation built into them, but then there's these other rocks which are still images. And at any time, if you want to find out where they are, you can right-click them and show them in your Finder or your Explorer window. So I'll choose this rock, I'll press OK, and now that default sphere has been replaced with those rocks. And we can see that a bit better by just increasing the size. Right, so we have that motion, but unfortunately, this one particle system is referencing the same sprite over and over again. So what I did was actually, one of the advantages to working here in the designer is that we can easily take and add additional particle systems. So now I have my primary system, which is those rocks falling, and I have this secondary system. And the best part is if I wanted this secondary system to absorb some of the settings of the primary system, I can easily do that. So one way is to just simply delete a block that exists on your secondary system. So for instance, I'm going to delete this motion block and I want you to see what happens. Once I've deleted that block, it's now inheriting the values of the motion block of the primary system. So no need to enter a new velocity value of 100 or type in that directional particle system. The other thing I could do is go to a block like the emitter type, which is the box emitter on the original particle system, and actually copy the emitter type, the entire series of properties here, go to my other emitter type, and paste those on over. Now, these particle systems are essentially doing the exact same thing, except one's a sphere and one's a rock. I'll just turn off the rock so we can see the spheres falling. And maybe I'll come in here to the emitter type and play around with the particles being born per second. I'll just set that to a larger value, something like 4,000, and then go to additional values as well, like play with the size and size randomness, just to give the motion of the secondary system a little bit of randomness compared to the primary system. Now, inside of After Effects, I'm just going to apply this. We've got the one system again, which is referencing just the one rock. But I've taken it upon myself to go onto my system, and I literally just grabbed from the location where the sprites are located these three rocks. So I've got those three rocks ready, and I'm going to have it referenced by that secondary particle system. So how I'll do that is I'll select each of these three images, and under the layer menu, I'm going to first of all pre-compose this. I'll call it images second system. I'll move these all into the new system and just do a little bit of housekeeping. That housekeeping is I need each of these actual images to be one frame. So I'll just use Option right square bracket to trim those. And then I'm going to run an action under the animation menu under Keyframe Assistant to sequence these layers. So now I have one rock followed by the other, followed by the other. Now, when you have particular, I'm just going to trim my comp settings here, or comp size, reference any image, it's best that the actual composition that they live within is small. So I'm going to go to composition settings and set this to the value of the biggest image being referenced, which is 500 by 500 pixels. I could make that even smaller in this instance, but now you can see I have a smaller composition with those three elements. And if I head back to where my particle system is, so we have those big spheres, I can go into the secondary system's properties and do the following. So in After Effects, choose a sprite, but rather than the library, I'll have this look for a layer directly in my composition. And that layer can be an image sequence like I just set up. And I'll choose that images second system. And notice how it's already set for these three different types of rocks. Let me turn off my primary system. So we could just see the secondary system are being all referenced by that second system. And then we could play around with the size and the location, as well as I just want to make sure that it doesn't cycle through this. I just want them to all to be a still image. So here you can choose under the time sampling, random still frame. Now it's just going to remain still, but have all those physics. So that's what I did. I set up a particular system, actually with 3 systems. One was just some clouds to add some additional debris to the final piece. Now, in terms of the foreground layers, I'll make a mention of a few things. I have an adjustment layer here that has 3 effects. So there's an effect in Universe called Overlight, which is your light leak effect. And the best way to look at effects in Universe is to go to your window menu, extensions, RG Universe dashboard. So this particular effect happens to be available in the stylized category. And if you scroll down, here's Overlight. Why this is the best way to view effects is that if you single click, you'll see all of the presets for these Universe effects, as well as the different textures that can be referenced for light leak. And I just grabbed 2 of these and set a flicker value. It happens to be the bokeh over top. And at the very end of this, have the bokeh essentially go down to a 0% opacity so that we can see the title after the rubble has cleared the frame. The other thing I used for a light leak effect is no light factory. So while these are basically a collection of several lens flares that you can choose from. In fact, let me just have one of these load up. And thank you for bearing with me. I know I'm 6 minutes over. These are the lens flares that you can access, but in fact, you could just grab one of the elements from a lens flare, like a glow ball, and that glow ball could essentially represent a light leak. In fact, you could have several glow balls here and no actual stripes. And then once you've chosen the elements that you want to represent your light leak, No Light Factory has something called behaviors, which are automatic animations. So on my final, I have the looping behavior of the No Light Factory lens flare set to pulse. So it basically just makes a pulsating move here, or that's the flicker of light, and then the pulse ends at 4 seconds to reveal the title, along with the other light leaks that you see here. The only other thing to mention is I added a little bit of grain using Magic Bullet Look's Renoiser, where you have a series of actual presets here specifically for mimicking various types of film. So from the list here, Renoiser that comes with Magic Bullet Looks, here are the different types of grain settings you could add to your title piece to make it feel more like film. And I increased the grain amount only for the fact that we have this webinar and I wanted to make sure that you saw the grain over top of the title. And that is where I took these additional elements. Like Chad on the Specular channel, I added some optical glow to the Specular and then played around with the blend mode of the reflection to go over top of the title, and then just made some subtle adjustments to the look that you had, Chad. So just in the diffusion channel so that it wasn't so bright after the strength that I had set to the optical glow. And that's
Sweet.
Indeed is the end. Only 8 minutes over. Vanessa, you had it locked down last week and me and Chad just failed you. I'm sorry. No? It's the Canadian.
Yeah, I'm Canadian on paper, so many things don't apply to me that apply to Canadians. But no one's perfect. No one's perfect. Yeah, I like you anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that concludes it for this week's webinar. I'm going to check to see if there's any questions, but just keep in mind this was recorded. You'll be able to check this out on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel. We then have our final episode for titles, looking at compositing even further in After Effects next week. Chad, what do we have in store?
Yeah, we're going to look at some compositing stuff, probably some super comp, probably some other things yet to be revealed.
That is correct. And then I'm going to probably take a look at a little bit of the camera tracker that's inside of After Effects as well for a few of the scenes.
Sweet.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for all the compliments, Isaac and Simon. Appreciative. And greetings to you, Thanasis, from Isaac in Cyprus.
Likewise, Episis. That was in Greek. It was likewise. Anyway, why am I speaking Greek to you? That was from Isaac.
That was for them. That was for. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Next
All right.
time, something that is aimed at other people, just close your ears, don't listen. I don't want you intercepting my goodwill, Nick.
Nope, I've already taken it. I know the type of person you are behind closed doors, so to speak. Oh, awesome. Thanks so much, Chad and Thanasis, for sharing your knowledge.
Yeah,
And
thanks,
we'll
guys. It was awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming and bearing with him and enjoying my lecture.
See everybody next week.
See you next week, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.